Good evening, and welcome to a review of James C. Cobb's The Most Southern Place on Earth, the Mississippi Delta, and the Roots of Regional Identity for Historiography 545 at Jackson State University under the instruction of Dr. Robert Luckett, Professor. What is regional identity and its components? Regional identity is made up of the qualities, beliefs, and ideologies of individuals and groups of a particular geographical division within a larger division that shapes and distinguishes itself from other individuals and groups outside of and within itself and at varying degrees. So you can see to the right the different components that makes up one's particular geographical identity, particularly within this case, the Delta. What is regional identity and its components, and how is it explained? Consider the soil regions of Mississippi and the components of one's identity within each region and outside of Mississippi and outside of the Deep South. You get varying degrees of sameness and differences. Mississippi has 12 different soil regions. You have the lowest bluffs, the Yazoo Mississippi Delta, the river lowlands, the brown loam area, the sand clay hills, the central prairie, piney woods, the flatwoods, the Gulf Coastal Terrace, the Pontotoc Ridge, the northeastern Tennessee Hills, and the Tombigbee Northeastern Prairie. So within each of those regions, and the people of those regions in regards to their race, in regards to their ethnicity, in regards to their socioeconomic status, and other modes of identities, are all going to be shaped to a degree of sameness and differences within Mississippi and outside of Mississippi, and furtherly outside of the southern region. Cobb's first contention is that he takes his audience in through this route. Many of the human and material extremes that were the keys to the Delta's identity, either as the South-South or America's Ethiopia, were shaped not by its location or isolation, but by its pervasive global and national economic influences and consistent interaction with the federal government, whose policies often confirm the Delta's inequities and reinforce its anachronistic social and political order as well. And this comes from Cobb's epilogue, An American Region, of The Most Southern Place on Earth. Cobb is making the attempt to navigate his readers to conclude that, in one instance, our individual identities in regards to our race, our ethnicity, our socioeconomic status, and our ideologies and more are formed in part by our individual and collective geographical identity. But on the other end, our experiences in the places of our geography that we believe is distinct from other persons of other geographical environs is no different if the social, political, and economic objectives of a nation or its regions are the same as other nations and their regions. And I want to make a few points in regards to that to show the instances of varying degrees of similarity and differences comparable to citizens of the Delta and other regions. Let's look at the socioeconomic living conditions of working class Black Deltans and white Appalachians of West Virginia. Same instances of economic oppression to some extent across those different regions in two different states of the South, in two different regions of the South. Then if you look at the politics of apartheid in South Africa and Jim Crow in the American South, to varying degrees of sameness and differences, you have social oppression of people of African descent or ancestry, not only across states or regions or countries, okay, but also across continents. And then as well, you have an example of the socioeconomic, political, and environmental oppression of the Standing Rock Natives of North Dakota as of this year, and instances of the Cheyenne and Arapaho of the Sand Creek Massacre in 1864. Same instances in which a group of people, otherwise known as Native Americans, the Cheyenne and Arapaho, Standing Rock Natives, and other groups who across time were culturally and politically oppressed by our American government, same degrees or same instances of varying degrees of cultural oppression across time. Cobb's next contention, or the contention that I like to make, is that referring to blues, how it was cultivated, trails of music and literature. Can geography be used to evaluate an extent or degree to which a music genre, literary form, or other artistic work can be cultivated? Within the Blues is a Lowdown Shaking Chill on page 278. This was versed. Although the blues flourished in a variety of locales, each of the music's several spawning grounds was a place where blacks came in search of a better life only to find themselves trapped in an endless cycle of hard work and meager reward, amid almost intolerable living and working conditions. Given this reality, it is hardly surprising that the blues tradition developed so fully and rapidly in the Mississippi Delta. While the historical context of the Delta is by no means adequate to explain the entire content of the blues, the relationship between the two is important to an understanding of both. What Cobbs is trying to convince us as readers is that the geography of the Delta, with its trials of African American, socioeconomic oppressed individuals and their conditions, and those also of the planter elite, increase the likelihood of the growth of blues music. But some things that Cobbs did not explore or left unanswered were such as follows. And if you could look at the diagram or the figure that I gave you in regards to the map, in regards to this particular subject, okay, which is titled Figure 1, Birthplaces of Recorded Blues Performers, 1890 to 1920, which comes from the Blues, is a Lowdown Shaking Chill, page 278. So these are some unexplored and unanswered questions. Number one, what factors help to promote the birth of the blues in Mississippi counties outside of the Delta? Because as you can see, some counties outside of the Delta did have blues, the birthplaces indicate the birthplaces of recorded blues performers, as well as those of the counties of Tennessee, Louisiana, and Arkansas. Question two, is it the geographical location of the Delta, the culture of plantation life, both, or neither, that cultivated the creation of the blues as a legitimate American music form? Because as you can see, indicative of the map, where these blues artists were born were more than likely plantation cultural environments. And some, of course, in the case of the next question, what factors of Shelby County, Tennessee, which is county seat of Memphis, made it just as acceptable to the birthplace of the blues, considering the idea or the fact that it is an urban area, which is environmentally and physically distinct from most of the Delta's primarily rural communities. Question 4. Was the birth or the upbringing of recorded blues artists or performers the ultimate determinant of the growth of blues music? And lastly, because Louisiana, Arkansas, and Tennessee have their own Delta regions, what factors prohibited the growth of blues in the river border counties of those states? Also, in reflection of artistic genre, deals with literature, trails of literature. Again, can geography be used to evaluate an extent or degree to which a literary form or artistic work can be cultivated? In Cobb's On Delta Literature in More Writers per Square Foot, page 306, this is versed. The locale with the Delta that produced the most writers and artists was Greenville, which by the middle of the 20th century enjoyed a reputation as the most open and tolerant community in the Delta, and perhaps in all of Mississippi as well. Contention 2 explores these unexplored and unanswered questions. What factors helped to promote the birth of literature in Greenville more than any other Delta town or city? Do we know of other towns? Has their research been done to provide evidence that there are other authors in other cities within or towns within the Delta? Question 2. Is it the spatial geography of Greenville, considering that Greenville is the largest city or town within the Delta? So is it the spatial geography of it that cultivated more writers per square foot? What led to that? Regarding the trials of music and literature in Mississippi Delta, after the observation and evaluation that many blues pioneers were African American, and most of the writers from Greenville during the mid 20th century were Caucasian, with their respective motivations of artistic expressions of the epitome of socioeconomic oppression in terms of the blues artists and a planet elite life in terms of those that versed about it, can one conclude that there is some validity to the ideology of Charles Darwin's natural selection? Geography aside, does nature, nurture, or both play a role in which racial ethnic groups produce more of some talents than others? What are your thoughts? Final stop goes fast forward into the distant past. Can remnants of geography be used to evaluate the cultural lifeways of groups in existence before the Mississippi Delta became plantation frontier? In Pure Soil, Endlessly Deep, Dark, and Sweet, the introduction of the most southern place on earth, contention 3 is explored. This is versed. Disturbed by little the mound-building Indians, who dwelt primarily on the sedimented high ground along the banks of rivers and streams, the rich delta jungle was slumbering still when Hernando de Soto claimed the area of the Yazoo Delta for Spain. But the Spanish made no effort to establish settlements in the southern coastal regions or portions of Mississippi, and the Delta continued its sleep. Contention 3 explained and contemplated. Cobb's audiences can infer from his minimal research that 1. Native Americans lived in isolated domains on the periphery rather than the interior of what we now know as the Delta. 2. Native Americans lived on higher rather than low-lying terrain. 3. Native populations were small in number. And 4. Therefore, according to Cobb, native cultural groups of the Northwest Mississippi area have disconnections with shaping or with the shaping of Delta geography as it exists today. Within Ethnic Heritage in Mississippi by Patricia Galloway, she explores the ideas behind why we need to understand the importance of Native American history in terms of Mississippians and others as their geographical contributions come into play. And this is versed. If we are to understand how these processes took place with references to the native cultures of the Southeast, we need to know a bit more than just what took place during the meeting of Native and European cultures. We need to step back into that shrouded prehistory to discover in a real sense where the Native Americans of the Southeast were coming from. Cases in point could provide research of the poverty point cultures of Northeast Louisiana and Northwest Mississippi, the Jaketown site and the Slate site of Belzona, the Wilford site near Clarksdale, and the Winterville site that's north of Greenville. My concluding points in this contention are that Cobbs failed to acknowledge the agricultural, architectural, and topographical contributions that the Mississippi culture bestowed to the Mississippi River Valley. Cobb did no better than many historians of the early and mid 20th century by obliterating Native American history through conducting minimal research and concluding, because of the lack of research, Native history that was only relative to the eras directly before, during, and after European expansion into North America. Native Mississippi culture by many means was advanced, prominent, and hierarchical. Therefore, many of these groups existed and thrived in the present day Delta region, for the same motives that the planet elite sought expansion into the region. Cobb failed to demonstrate and bridge connections between Native Mississippi culture and the planet elite of the 16th and 17th centuries. The latter and their contributions to create the most southern place on earth cannot be separate from the former peoples and their cultures that created the roots of regional identity before early westward expansion. Therefore, regional identity cannot be formed independent of the culture of humans. Geography is a vital element in shaping one's collective identity. Thank you.